Welcome to the Behavioral View. Hey everyone, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words and we'll tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over. Hi everybody and welcome to the Behavioral View. I'm Shannon Hill from the CentralReach Institute and I am here with one of my regular panel members today. Nissa, you want to say hi?
Hi everyone, Nissa Van Etten, Manager of Assessment and Clinical Training here at CentralReach.
And sitting in for Carrie Millico today, we have Kristen Smith. Kristen, you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi, I'm Kristen Smith. I am a senior instructional designer in the clinical programming and curriculum development.
And our special guest today is Ellie Kazemi from the Behavioral Health Center for Excellence. Ellie, you want to say hi now?
Hi everyone.
And we are gathered here today to talk about measurement. I am really, really excited for this one. But before we dive in, we like to do our fun question of the day. And we have a suggested question this time. And we would like to know about bucket lists. So I guess this could be anything. It could be something that you've already done from your bucket list or something that's still on it. What do you guys got?
Who goes first?
Jump right in there. I will go first. Mine is easy. I want to skydive and plan to do it in October. So I started off easy with hot air balloon rides, parasailing. And now I'm going to take that jump. Literally.
Big jump.
Yeah. If anyone wants to come along, let me know.
No. No. That's all you. That's good for me. That's all you.
Great. I'll live stream it for everyone's enjoyment.
We can do a podcast from the beginning of the plane and then at the bottom.
As I faint on the way down. Yeah. What else? What do you guys have?
I've always wanted to run a marathon, and I do not like running. It is my least favorite activity, so I figured might as well add that to the list and see if I can accomplish it.
Why is something on your bucket list that you hate doing?
So I enjoy running 1 to 2 miles. I'm trying to understand the mindset of those marathon runners who run multiple miles. Like, where does their mind go? What do they do? How do they talk themselves into it and sustaining? It's just a skill I've never thought I could accomplish. So it feels like something I would like on my bucket list. I might start with a half marathon to see if I can do that first.
I understand the thinking on that because that's part of why I want to do the skydiving. And when I turned 50, my whole year was about doing things I was afraid of. Just kind of take that away. You know
that. I absolutely love that.
It's sort of a conquering yourself sort of thing, I guess. Yeah.
So adventurous.
Trying to be.
I think mine would be, I want to go scuba diving in Australia. And I am like I do not. Flying is like something I have like a hate relationship with. So to like get on a plane and fly all the way to Australia, but it's worth it in the long run because it's just so beautiful to scuba dive there, I've heard. So,
are you already a scuba diver?
Yeah.
Wow, very cool.
I figured you have to be. Who says I want to scuba dive? And I was like, you knew exactly where.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, mine is to actually learn to use these instruments in a manner that I could entertain. I keep picking them up, trying to learn. I did that years ago with my son, and he far exceeded me, left me behind, and I didn't have the courage to sort of try to keep up with him at the time because he just smoked me and left me behind. That's really what happened when he started to play. And And I've been trying to get back to play, but I think my goal is to be able to, at a family gathering or when we're out camping, to be able to sort of play more than one song and sing and play. So that would be definitely on my list. And it takes time, and I don't give it enough time. And I have one more, and I think it competes, and that is to learn to. Have you all seen electronic swing dance?
No.
It's tap, jazz, swing, and just Google it. It is so awesome, so fun, and it is incredible skill, which I'm setting myself up, but it is something I would love the opportunity to advance my skill to dance like that. So it's on my bucket list, and my husband's promised he would commit with me if I commit.
I will be Googling this. It looks like that would be some fun videos to watch for
It
sure.
is. It's definitely fun.
I mean, I can only do this kind of dancing. Well, okay, that was fun, but I guess we should dive in to our subject matter. And I'm going to begin. I try not to do this very often, but I'm going to begin by lavishing compliments on you, Ellie.
Oh, no.
The white paper. The white paper, I mean, and the three of us all geeked out over it in conversation before and talking about getting ready for this session today. That was something that was so very needed. And for anyone who is watching who doesn't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to read the long title off of my screen. Selecting appropriate assessment instruments to measure treatment outcomes for individuals with autism spectrum disorder, guidelines for clinicians, payers, patients, and other stakeholders. That is such an important contribution to the field.
Thank you. It was very much a group effort. And the subject matter experts who have helped develop that paper were writing the paper to submit. So I definitely would say I'm privileged to have been in a position to coordinate and bring everything together and put efforts forward. But as you know, it takes a village to do something like that. And I certainly had an incredible village with me. So
what motivated you guys to want to put that out?
I think that when I came to work at BHCOE, Sarah Litvak made it very clear that as an organization that puts itself forward with regards to where our profession needs to be, where the standards need to be, where we all need to be next, that she has no reservations about putting forth every resource she can to put out good work and to make a statement that is appropriate for the profession. And at the time, I'd been working alongside Sigmund Eldavik, who had been trying to do different outcome studies. I'd also worked with several colleagues at UCLA and heard about a few outcome studies everybody was attempting to do. So I'd worked with a colleague at Easter Seals, who's the director of research. And, it really had been a passion for me, an area I know we need to be in. We need to absolutely show the outcomes of our interventions. But it's been difficult. Every time we come up with research studies, we come up with designs, the work had been requiring a lot more investment and a lot more time and large funding, frankly. And when Sarah came to me, it just made sense to pull together individuals I've been working with who'd been thinking about outcomes for some time, who'd been leading this area and really wanting to move the needle forward in this area. And so we started to talk about what are some of the things that we want to keep, what's the heart of behavior analysis, and where do we need to really educate the public and advance ourselves toward a place where we can be alongside other behavioral health professions and be understood.
And to be understood is, that is something that I'm passionate about as well, in that, I think people who watch this regularly have heard me say many times, I came backwards into behavior analysis from other fields where assessment is a different endeavor than what we typically are doing in behavior analysis. And Kristen, I know Kristen and Nissa both are actually doing a lot of work in this area too. So Kristen, you want to throw out some of the ideas that you guys have been putting forth in terms of measurement and assessment?
Yeah. So one of the things I love the most about this white paper was it created like a really, like a clinician who's a brand new clinician could take that and say like, oh, here's a good way that I can map assessments. And here's a way to establish criteria for whether or not that assessment is meaningful. Because I think that sometimes we get so focused on what we're doing day to day and then like what's billable and not, that we forget that we need to not just be evaluative in the skills we're teaching, but also the like actual outcomes, right? Like checking off a list of like, yes, you can tact and you can receptively ID and you can match. That's great. But like, what does that mean for a human being in their context? And I really loved the breakdown of like the meta and macro data. And thinking about it in kind of like that tiered system, right? Like it's not just all these bigger picture, huge repertoire shifts, but like we can also look with like the VB map and the ABLEs that are kind of like either a meta or a meso or like a junior macro assessment, you know?
Thank you.
So from like I mean, it was beautiful. When it came out, I was like, this.
Thank you. As you can imagine, that's the biggest challenge, right? Digesting the research, but also recognizing the feasibility, and I I'm sure we'll get into feasibility of measurement and the importance of having those conversations, because it's one thing to have a beautiful scientific design and think about what we need from a scientific perspective, and then there's another to really work with the reality of where the marketplace is and the contingencies upon providers and our clinicians. So we've definitely had a lot of those conversations. So I really appreciate you saying that it's at least practically consumable.
Yes.
And I want to add that, I have the paper on my desktop. I have it on actually multiple desktops, and I've cited it many times in a lot of the CEs I've developed for assessment. But what I really took from it was that framework for decision making. If I'm a clinician working in an organization and this is the assessment my organization has purchased, what is my rationale in going and saying, hey, I need this other assessment. I need training in it. I need experience. I need someone to supervise me to understand how to utilize it. Because the assessment you've provided, while it may be great, it doesn't work for these individuals that I'm serving. So really adding that decision-making for clinicians to go back and say, maybe I was taught this one, but it doesn't fit the need for this child in front of me. So how do I gain experience in these other assessments? Or can I pull them all into multiple assessments into one kind of, we've talked about this at CentralReach Battery, right? Pulling in multiple skills from different assessments, because as whole individuals, we aren't just one ABLES R or one VB map. We are multiple skills from a number of assessments. And, I know back in previous days, I would pull skills that weren't in an assessment because it was something that individual needed to learn. So how do we support clinicians and educators, now that I'm working a lot in the education space, in selecting appropriate goals that might not be in an assessment, but are prerequisite skills for some of those as we call here at CentralReach, skyscrapers, those boxes, that we need to fill. I loved the paper. I have many versions, have many citations for it.
I really appreciate it. I see the work that you do as taking the complicated and the difficult and taking it and making it digestible and easy to use. Mm-hmm. So you remove what I consider in measurement and in assessment to really be that unnecessary effort a clinician has to put forward. And you really make it such that all they have to do is to apply their clinical skills and be able to evaluate and utilize the information. And I think that hearing that from individuals who do that every day, that's their MO in life, is pretty cool. I definitely think that our profession is at a place where we need to think a little bit more about how we do assessment as a whole. And I think that when I came to behavior analysis, Shannon, like you, I came to behavior analysis actually from a training in clinical psychology, and we did whole batteries, and we, did those based on the referral problem coming in, and it was highly evidence-based. We needed to go back in the literature and, utilize the right assessments. when I found behavior analysis, I fell in love with the single subject designs, the individual nature of looking at change, and that level of empirical control. I couldn't get enough of behavior analysis. And, it wasn't until I started to realize that we just are not using the same dependent variables at all, that I saw back the value for the training I had received and finding, convergence between those worlds.
100% agree. I think I took the same path. Even in graduate school, sitting in the classes, learning about normative assessments and standardization processes, but then going to work every day with adults who have intellectual disabilities who were always in the tail. And so the instruments were never sensitive enough to show any growth, is what brought me to single subject design as well. But it seemed like we were forced to choose, right? You either are in behavior analysis doing single subject or you're not. And I think that that's a false dichotomy. So this is giving behavior analysts who probably were not given the other side of the training at all on assessment to even be able to evaluate whether an assessment instrument is psychometrically sound, has been my dissatisfaction in behavior analysis, right? That everything's criterion referenced, but in terms of finding information about construct validity and content validity and divergence and convergence, it's hard to find in our instruments. So I
100%.
appreciate that you guys were at least teaching that these things exist and what to look for and expect psychometrically.
Well, 100%. And I think that it's beautiful because we see the field is beginning to recognize that. We're seeing new studies where they're beginning to realize we need to manualize some of the criteria reference assessments we're using. Two clinicians are not going to administer it the same way. Yes, there's the conceptual underpinnings of verbal behavior, and the strength of that matters, but still, conducting an assessment requires certain things to become standard between clinicians to be able to actually do these. And I think that we're definitely moving to a place where the field is beginning to recognize those. I also have to say, from a parent's perspective, I don't know about you ladies, but my world works in these weird ways. I sort of moved towards something like quality of our work matters so much to me. And when I moved to supervision, it almost seemed like my entire world was this constant reminders of where supervision needs assistance and where supervision needs help, and where it was just these constant drops in my life. And I feel that a lot of what it's become about is these assessments and how we do assessments. And so a few of my colleagues and good friends have had children who've been diagnosed, and they're seeking behavior analysts because they know I'm a behavior analyst and they know that that's something important to them. And so, they tell me a little bit about that intake and the assessment. And I'm quite often surprised that the expectation of the general public or individuals who are maybe physicians, like a friend of mine is a physician, and my other friend is a sociology professor. And, when I think about their expectation of assessment and where the mismatch happens when they meet with a behavior analyst, I think it's another thing to say. They expect the behavior analyst to ask some questions that can capture where their child is on a spectrum of things that are occurring for them. And they find that the questions often get very specific, sometimes about things that does not at all relate to their child. So, they don't see change in those questions then, the way you see with norm reference assessments, right? So when you administer something like the Vineland, you're likely to ask a question or two where the child is not, but it kind of moves you closer to where the skill set of the child is. So the parent feels innately understood out of the assessment procedure. And they're like, okay, you heard me understand my problems. There's a holistic picture. There's a case conceptualization, including those questions. And I didn't realize, to be honest, how much we're missing that until I really started this project. Even from a parent's perspective, from a clinician's perspective, I was extremely happy with being able to get at some of the core areas we needed to work on and target for skill development. And then, of course, being able to get at potential cause of behavior was beautiful. But from a parent's perspective, that holistic case conceptualization and asking those questions really matters. And I'm beginning to realize how much we would benefit as a field from being able to kind of utilize these assessments, not just to say, I need to do this because I'm being asked to, not just to do it because we need to show outcomes, which are important in the type of interventions we offer and what happens across our kids, but also to conceptualize a case holistically.
Secret word number 1, results.
What you just said, like I'm jumping inside. I just submitted a course to Shannon on compassionate assessment processes, and really, again, going into that assessment process, with your notebook and your assessment, you don't even have your assessment determined yet, but just to understand the family, to build rapport, and that happens in that first intake, asking really open-ended questions about who the family is. I think that's a piece that I took a lot from this paper, was that going back to the referral rationale, that family is seeking services because there is something happening in their life where they cannot manage and they need support. So the best way to understand that referral rationale, other than the medical record review, is talking to the family. Why are you here today? How can I help you? And I think that is a piece that is missing in training, that, like you're saying, we are very skilled in the technical aspects of the field, but these are people, and when we go in, yes, we have an agenda and we have 97151 and 97152 hours that we have to accomplish. But before we even start there, we need to just know who they are, who is on the other side of that table with us. So that I love that. And that, again, from a parent perspective, very similarly, you want to be cared for. You want to understand that person, you're not just another case on their caseload, but you are, someone important to them, and they're trying to help you.
So that makes me think too, like the idea of being compassionate with it, because I think that we're also, and I've been guilty of this in my career, so focused on those numbers that come out that sometimes we forget, I'm going to send this parent a report that says that their 9-year-old is at a 4-year-old age. Do I really need to include that in this report? Number one, is that a metric that's actually moving my intervention forward? But then also thinking about, like, how is that going to land with that family to see, like, that's a very harsh reality to see. I think sometimes just the disparity and where their child is, or their adult. I mean, I think we have room to grow as a field with that and how we talk about those numbers.
100%. And it's, I feel like we're all guilty of it. Every day we can just get better, right? So when I think about the generations of graduate students who've graduated, who were, we have been lucky at Cal State Northridge. We have someone who's a PhD level school psychologist who teaches, assessment and teaches norm reference assessments and, more broadly what they mean. But even under those circumstances, to actually pull those together into a behavior assessment has not been their history. And I think about what are they left with? They're left with whatever it is that the scoring system tells them the outcomes of that assessment are. It makes perfect sense. We've not provided the training. At BHCOE, we surveyed parents, not surveyed, we actually had focus groups. We meet with stakeholders to learn what the areas of importance are to them. We meet with providers when we're doing something like measurement. We want to make sure it's feasible, it's affordable, it's something that they would implement. We're not just putting it in some vacuum and in a bubble. And we also have the conversations with the families. And I was just shocked to see that when we asked the parents, what's important to you? What do you want measured as to what it is that you want to see at the end of the day, as to what the outcomes of behavior analysis will be for you? And they were like, I want my kid happy. I kid you not. I want my kid happy. I want the quality of my life improving so that we all feel less stressed, less bogged by the constant everyday worries. I'd like to know that my kid's moving toward independence. And I want them socially aware. I want them at a place where they can be flexible if possible, wherever they are. I would just want those things. And we would ask providers, of course, the same questions. And they're like, we're going to work on MANS, tact, the number of goals we can achieve with regards to, and it's not that they're so disparate, because you think about, okay, the number of goals, those goals probably have something to do with independence. It's just that the gap is that we're not communicating those appropriately because we've not put forth those assessments holistically. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I think to myself, like, where we are is just a reality of just all of us trying to be better every day. And I really think our field and the types of reports I see, or when I do see things like that sort of makes me twitch a little bit, Chris, when it says, this kid is, speaking at the 2-year-old level. And I'm like, who will benefit from this? Why is this information here? I think to myself, this poor clinician did not have the training or the support to be able to do it. And so we've been thinking about and putting together workshops at the HCOE to put forward on how to not just do the assessment, but how do you include it in behavioral support and programming for your child, programming for your adult. And I'll be honest with you, even we get subject matter experts that are like, oh, I know a lot about this assessment, but that holistic approach, they're super excited about getting to a place where we can actually do that. It's not something that has been done quite often. So it's, we're at a place where we're all realizing we need to improve, I think. And my goal is just 1% better every day, because otherwise I'm going to be very upset with myself with what I just did yesterday.
Well, I think you highlight something that I found a lot of value in. So when I started off at an organization that was phenomenal at assessments, like skill building assessments. And luckily, as part of my graduate coursework, we actually had an assessment course. We got to play with all these assessments. I was so lucky. But then I saw you guys put the PSI in the white paper, the Parenting Stress Index. And I worked at an organization that would utilize more of a constructional or systemic approach. And we measured using the PSI, and we would still have like adolescents who engaged in like some pretty intense behavior, challenging behavior. But the parent stress was down because they had like the strategies to manage that. And we really looked at that as an outcome of our intervention. Like we looked at skill building too, but also stress. And I just felt like that was such an important assessment, because like you said, it's being a parent is stressful in and of itself. But then when you're, managing skill building and you've got sessions and your child may engage in some challenging behavior, like that's even more stressful. So,
and you might just have more than one kid.
Yeah.
It's just hard sometimes. Yeah. I thought about you when I saw PSI was on there because I know that you're such a fan of it.
Oh, I just love that assessment. I think it's just, I love the idea too of parents saying like, hey, I've reported that I'm less stressed. Like, even if I still feel really stressed, like this measure is telling me that like my stress is a little bit reduced.
And I wonder too about using those sorts of outcomes as social validity measures that maybe just are a little bit more informative than, did this help you on a scale of 1 to 5? Did you like the treatment? I have a lot of strong feelings about social validity and what it means to measure it. I really hate a Likert scale, a satisfaction Likert scale. I know that we've been with that for decades now. And you have to start with something, right? But identifying what it means to be contributing in a socially valid way is so much more than asking people if they're pleased. We already have many, many decades of research saying that if you ask people if they're pleased, they're going to tell you they're pleased. So what else do we need to know about our families and their needs to be able to say that this actually really mattered, what we did?
And I think the right assessment tools with family empowerment and stress can also point to some of the things that the family may be asking us for with referrals. I was speaking to a clinician who pointed out that she was using one of the tools that we have recommended, the life quality assessment tool that we have recommended for children and their families. And she said, what's really interesting is that the family during the intake assessment kept telling us about the importance of the kid engaging in behaviors to be able to eat with us at the table, use his fork, use his spoon, eat at the table, sit at the table. And I don't recall how old the kid was exactly, but I do recall that the clinician felt that this request was not necessarily, it didn't seem to her to make sense to be such a high priority for the family. It was one of these circumstances where she had to sort of go, well, this is important to them, so it must be important to us. But there was this gap of why is this so important? And this kid's quite young comparatively. And when she did the life quality assessment and went through the questions, she realized that so much of the family's life with regards to interactions with others and socialization is all around eating and food and others being at the table. And it wasn't until she heard that she realized that's his outlet for socialization. That's the time he could be learning from, aunts, uncles, and apparently many cousins that were coming over. So these meal times were super important for these reasons to the family and therefore a source of stress. And I thought to myself, how interesting that, we kind of don't realize that the culture of a family can also be questioned through some of these, appropriate sort of social validity assessments. And we need them to be stronger. So we used, as you saw in the paper, we used the Cosman method, which is a consensus method to look for reliability and validity of assessments, to select them for the white paper so that we could keep it objective, make sure that it was actually feasible being used by people, but also it was reliable and valid. And what we realized is that we can't use those criteria when it comes to our social validity assessments. None of them will meet it. They're not there yet, except the PSI. And although the PSI does have those, it is very narrow and it only gets a very specific area. So we obviously need more broader understanding of families' sense of empowerment and their quality of life as a whole. So I think we definitely need to see these tools all advance. I just realized, because I'm looking at all of you, that I'm quite fuzzy, so I'm going to... There. It always works.
One of the papers I actually read recently as I developed one of the CEUs was the Culturally Informed Functional Assessment. It was written in 1996 by Matsumi Tanaka, and it is fantastic in that one of the things they talk about, and it's been decades since it's been published, was really understanding the family that you're assessing and where they're coming from culturally, and does it match the assessor? Because it sounds like the clinician that you're speaking of might have had their own kind of perception of what is socially significant. And, an assessment like, I don't want to call it the SIFA, but that's what I've called it for short, seems like there's a way that you as a clinician can self-evaluate or self-assess when I'm going in to select these goals. Do they match this family? And what questions, there are a list of questions you can ask the family to better understand why this is important to them. Why is mealtime behavior so important when your child might not be able to communicate or, use the toilet appropriately? Or maybe I have goals for my interactions with your child, but you have goals that are very important to your ability to function as a family, to communicate with your child, to function with other families. So it's one tool that I've used in my experience to kind of at least start the conversation, to start asking, why these things are so important to you, or can I come observe mealtime? Let me see what that looks like during my assessment. Can I spend 20 minutes as you're preparing for mealtime to see what that looks like?
And as you can imagine, the family might not even know that, right? So during onboarding, you're doing your assessment, you're asking that question, and they say to you, I just would like for him to eat and sit at the table, and just engage in eating at the table and sit for longer periods of time and listen to conversations. And that they know that they want to see more of, for example, but they might not quite have thought about or really think about their family style of, that's our socialization time. That's when his cousins come over, and that's where I get the social comparison of where he is, and he doesn't have access to his, friends through this activity that we socialize, and then the kids engage, and they might not even be there to be able to tell you that. Does that make sense? And so it's not until we ask those right questions that we can get that picture to say, can I come see mealtime? Because guess what? Maybe I won't target that behavior the same way anymore. Now I understand the function of what you're looking for.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And you guys, we already spend a lot of time doing our assessments because they are so in depth and report writing can be so laborsome. And we have these tools now to auto generate a lot of reporting. I'm wondering what you guys think about using those tools that save time and make it more feasible to spend more time in other activities, and yet not being stuck in the parameter of this auto-generated report, being able to take some time to tailor these things into what we want to be saying us. What would I say, not what would the publisher of this instrument say.
Secret word number 2, thought.
Don't everyone jump on that one at once.
I think that there are, and a lot of my role is pulling in the WebABLEs and the AFLs online to understand how you can be efficient with your time, how you can prepare the assessment to spend more time face-to-face with the client and their family. So what are some of the ways those digital assessments allow you to kind of pull areas of focus before you go and meet the family? I think that there's a lot to be said for some of that support. But I always say in report writing, and I know I've done this in my own career, is we are the artists that paint that picture of that child, of that client to the funding source. They don't see the art. They just see a stack of paper, and sometimes there are 40 pages and they don't want to read the whole thing. Or they see the PDF of the criterion reference assessment that we're all told to submit. But unless we write about that individual and their actual significant needs, we're not able to portray who they are and why they need the treatment hours that we're requesting. So I think there are areas where we can kind of comply with what is required of funding sources, and there are areas that we need to spend more time really building out that rationale as to why this individual does need that support for the person who's reading them, who might never meet that client. I think there are pieces we can move around to ensure that we're doing justice for these individuals.
Yeah. That makes me think too. I mean, Shannon, you're just like making me pivot in a different direction or on a different level of data. But I also think that's like a great place to be highlighting those, like, we're not like taking an assessment item, or we shouldn't always be taking an assessment item and directly implementing it, right? Like that's our longer term goal. So what are the skills that we're going to work on to get to that goal? And really like creating systems of measurement and outlining that for both funders and for families. Because again, it's like, you want to sit at dinner and we want you to interact and we want you to do this, but like at this point, you won't even come to the table, and that's okay. So what are we going to do to get you where you want to go? And it may look different when we start it than what you thought it would. But I think that's also where we can like incorporate some of that nuance of like, here's our element compound analysis of the skills you need. And then here's the way also we're going to measure it on like a meso level or that intermediate level to evaluate our progress toward those more macro data in the assessments.
Maybe you want to define all of that for people who are watching this who don't have this background yet.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about the levels of data, right, we have like our micro data that are collected daily, and those are like our programmatic skill data. And then historically, I've always referred to this next tier as like the metadata, where it's like you're in between your macro, which are your assessments, right? These are like our repertoires we're evaluating. But recently our team, like we did so much research and we're so nitpicky about things because we work at the best place that lets us be. So we actually like separated that middle tier of data and we started calling them meso when you're like evaluating skills. So when you're like directly measuring. So for example, like probes, I'm going to probe what the next skill is. How are we there? Or like CBMs would be a great example of meso. And then the meta are at that same level where it's right in between the micro data and the macro, but they're just like data about data. So they still tell you bigger picture what's going on, but it's just like summative data. And so I think like looking at, you know, that middle level of it lets us evaluate our progress on those bigger assessments, and is such a good reminder that we shouldn't always just be like pulling the skill all the way down from the third tier into our daily practice.
That's such a good point. You know,
I'm a very big data nerd.
I really thought to myself when we started this project, and luckily iChom and Ivy Chung and them were doing the same, and we had these parallel lives where we were getting into a place to think about these assessments, and I had these nightmares that maybe behavior analysts would target each item, like each question in a questionnaire, because which makes sense, right? So there is, I want to get at and build this skill. I have to define it, work backwards. But there is something to be said about the influence of behavior at a different level. There is this clear indirect influence, right, of a skill you build. You build the skill, what you should see is change in other areas. And it should really be that you've selected pivotal skills that result in that. And so I think that what you point out makes me think a lot about what we will look like moving forward and how we can really work well together to conceptualize a case. I also really love the idea that we are the artists. And I think about recently I've had a lot of sinus pain and sinus pressure, and I've been getting sick. And so I've had lots of assessments done by my physician. And I think about all of the different CAT scans and all the different things that they did. I received these automated reports in my profile as a patient that sort of told me, where I was, what's my level versus what is typical. And looking at those assessments told me a little bit about what may be off, but it wasn't really until my physician gave me a call and drew the picture and connected these things, told me which things being off mattered, how they were interrelated or not at all, which things were not of concern, that I could understand that report. So receiving a report that was automated did not in any way detract my interest in what's going on. But I wasn't able to put that together and understand it. It was, I needed a connectivity between these items to be able to go, oh, so my allergies, they work me up, I leak. There is no way for that leak to come out. This sounds disgusting, but I needed that, And then I put it in a common, language for myself, understood where she was going with that. And now I'm like, okay, so what are the solutions we can? And so I think that's sort of what I think of that we could be doing better, is I don't think that we need to take an assessment that is, standardized with very clear outcomes and now say, I'm going to come up with my own way of explaining this. I'm going to change the wording. I don't think that's needed or necessary. I do think we need to come up with what is the key components of what we need to relay. And then we need to paint that picture. I thought that was very well said.
Yeah. I like the idea too of painting it like in dialogue. So like, I'm going to sit down with you. I'm not going to hand you like a 40-page report that you're going to skim through. It's going to make you feel bad. You'll stop reading it. But like, I'm going to sit with you and like create a narrative of your child. And then also in there, I can sprinkle in why your child is such a superstar and why I'm so excited to work with your child. Or I'm saying child, but I also mean like the spectrum of age. So like your child may be 45. But I really like that analogy. I think that's great. A metaphor.
What do you guys think are our next steps as we're continuing to grow in this area? What are the logical next steps writ large for behavior analysis to move forward in these areas?
Can I go? So after the white paper came out, I read it. I like sat on it for a few days. I talked to Carrie and we're like, we're going to set up a meeting with David Cox because I was like, I love this, but to me, it illustrated this huge problem of gaps in services we have. When you hit like 7th or 8th grade, there's no assessments. Like there's very few assessments for anybody older that could fit into that framework and meet the acceptance criteria. And that feels very problematic for me. So I would love, because like people don't just stop living after 8th grade, right? Like they go on, they need support in different ways or the same way, but we should still have a way that's like statistically sound to evaluate the outcomes of our intervention. So I really hope the field looks at like adult services or even teenage services, but like how can we really create measures that are meaningful for learners and their stakeholders in that age group? I feel like we've really been a little bit short-sighted in developing those tools.
I guess I don't know if it's short-sightedness or just that we haven't grown to it yet. Because as we get older, the skills mushroom and the decision trees go all over the place. And maybe we had to get to a certain point with the younger age groups before we're ready to take that next step, to even begin to map on all of those different kinds of trajectories. It is harder. But I have also many times said I wish everybody was required to do some rotations in adult services, or even teenage services, before you go back to that smaller group. Because my personal experience is when I worked backwards, and I think I benefited that way. By the time I started working with little guys, I realized, if we don't jump on that behavior now, what that's going to look like when they're 30, right, and 200 pounds, and still needing certain types of assistance that are not necessarily so comfortable to try to give. So I think that there's probably, I don't know. I agree with what you're saying 100%. And I just think it's really, really hard unless you start breaking it into very small pieces of life areas to do those assessments, which there are some of those. But then we get into the psychometric parts of that. And we have to grow in that world too.
Yeah.
I'd love to see, and I've been a part of a couple small groups on outcomes. What does that look like for our field? Because of the individualized nature of the work that we do and the different types of measurement that we would need to communicate. Is it always parental stress in addition to increased independence, in addition to movement to least restrictive environments? Are those the outcomes we're looking for? Is it unique per age group or learner or service model? I think that is an area that we can grow into. I think, as we have become a medical service, that's also an area that the medical service industry has moved towards. So it's something that I would love to be a part of, and I'd love to learn more about as we also standardize assessment processes. I think that the two kind of go hand in hand with each other.
I think I'd like to see sort of these two-tier approaches, and hopefully not so far in the future, hopefully very soon. And one is for us to really unite around the type of assessments we select so that we could speak to the outcomes across our patients, across organizations. So it's not so organization specific, it's not clinician specific. And I say this because, there is this concept of risk adjustment in behavioral health or in medicine, which is to sort of consider and recognize that two patients are not going to be the same. You're going to have patients with certain demographics and certain familial and medical circumstances that may not put them at best circumstances to gain the most out of intervention. So you're going to have intervention effects that differ for individuals, but we don't quite know what those are. We experientially know what they are, but we don't know exactly what those are. And I would argue that it's very probable that certain clinics or certain organizations get more or less of certain patients in certain areas, and they're more likely to then face those. So I'd love for us to unite as a field around how we assess outcomes rather than sort of continue to do our own thing and say, I'm doing it best. Our hope in putting forth the framework was to sort of call to everyone to say we really need to unite, which, an organization like yours absolutely does. And I think that that's where we need to be. We need to really get people to understand the importance of that, to be able to understand those risk factors. And I think the other thing that I would love for us to begin to consider is the specialty areas. When I think about pediatric feeding or feeding disorders, when I think about the subset of our clients that have sleep disorders, that changes the game, right? So when you're up all night, and you're not just up all night within that first 8 months, when your kid's an infant, life changes. Your body no longer sustains, right? So there is, these areas that I don't think we can fit in a general model. Everybody should not be tested for those things. Everyone should not be tested for severe behavior problems, right? But there are appropriate assessments for each of those specialties, and there are, across of all of us, enough pediatric patients that may have pediatric feeding issues that we can begin to say, what are some of the common grounds? And I'd love for us to move to those specialties. So that, I think that those are my thoughts on the fly.
I do really like that. I really do. But
I
I
love
always
that.
have to throw out living in rural areas where there's not a lot of service. There's something to be said also about a really good generalist who has some experience in various areas, just because we still are not, I don't know at what point we're going to hit where we actually have enough service providers to do everything. I know that we're growing very quickly, but I also know that we're growing in clumps. But there's still areas where we're not as plentiful as in other areas. Can I put in a plug for just one small, very micro thing? Especially since I have Nessa here.
That's a man.
Maybe so. I would love to see these very cumbersome criterion reference instruments develop some shortcuts, basals and ceilings and things like that.
And that is a request we have heard in all of my interactions with educators and clinicians. A lot of my role was first just hopping on as they administered the APLS-R and the APLS and asking, what does your practice look like? How are you doing this? What is the common ground in utilizing these assessments? And that is a request that we are hearing pretty consistent.
There's also, I'm not sure about your data set. I think that I could get lost looking at the data forever. And, I'm fortunate to have Dr. David Cox and his team. And so we get to work together and interpreting and looking at these. I was quite surprised to see the minimum age of a lot of our patients that are coming to organizations. And I was having a meeting with Amin Klin. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. Incredible individual who's done a lot of work in the field of autism. He's at the Marcus Center, and I have a lot of respect for him. But he's, not from the field of behavior analysis. He's much more known across the field of autism. And he was really surprised to find how late we're getting a lot of our patients, because so much of what is being done is that early, early diagnosis, early treatment. That's where we know we're going to make huge difference. And I know that as a field, we're moving towards saying we're forgetting these adults. These little kids become adults, right? Don't do that. Recognize that they need services, and we're sort of moving there. But I also think that there's something to be said about how early are we really getting them, because in our data sets, we're seeing that actually that median age of when they're getting them is closer to 5, which is way later, right? So it's like right before school age. I don't know if your data set looks different, but that's what we're seeing most of our organizations get, is that median age of around 5 is the entry.
Is that because behavior analysts aren't included in early intervention service programs?
It's a really good question.
Or are they just getting no services until 5? Nothing's getting caught.
And I think it depends on the region and the diagnostician. Anecdotally, at least from my own personal experience, I know when I've done that background interview with families, it was a lot of they were young, and we felt that they would start communicating later, and they still engaged in some behaviors where they could be social in a daycare setting, but it wasn't until X, Y, or Z happened that we went to the diagnostician. And here, at least in Texas, in interviews and conversations with these diagnosticians, or a handful here in Austin, a lot of them erred on the side of caution. So we've heard them say, we're not comfortable, we're not familiar with autism, we weren't trained in it, we're not ready to diagnose until there's an absolute need for some sort of intervention.
Secret word number 3, evaluation.
Well, as I wrap up, where can people go? What kinds of resources are out there for behavior analysts who want to enrich their knowledge in measurement and outcomes? And you can self-promote here. That's fine.
I've got some courses in the CentralReach Institute on assessment. There's a series of courses that are completely free. They're all CEUs on how to administer. I did take some of the BCO decision-making framework and made it really digestible with some PowerPoints and images on kind of, if the client portrays like this, what assessment should I look at? What questions should I ask? And there are 2 other courses in the Institute regarding assessment and decision-making.
Very valuable. Well, we are definitely putting forward series of webinars as well. So we're tackling each of the assessments, for example, the PDDBI, and making sure that folks know the development of it, how to administer it, how to collect actual accurate information. And this is back to the TRICARE report. Some of the information submitted was not done correctly to begin with by behavior analysts. So how do we help behavior analysts, score it correctly, as well as we are then bringing in behavior analysts to take a behavioral perspective of the assessment and how can they utilize it in case conceptualization and programming. So we are going to be putting forward these assessment workshops that will combine both how do you use it, how do you give it, how do you interpret it, and how do you use it as a behavior analyst, and how can you case conceptualize with it. And I'm quite excited about that because it ups our game and really puts us forward to be able to offer a service that I think is really important. And hopefully helps us have more accurate information. So, clinicians are doing these correctly across board with some direction. And then the other thing that we're doing that, it makes me super excited, as a faculty member at Cal State Northridge. These are the dream projects. These are the dream grants you get in your faculty career, is that practical hands-on action research that you have resources and data teams and people to work with. And we are launching a value-based payment model within which we're really collecting outcome data. So we are actually going to be collecting that information across organizations to be able to look across organizations. And that excites me because even though in the white paper, what we could do is to bring a team of experts together to say these measures meet these reliability, validity, we could kind of select them based on that. We have not really looked at these from a clinician perspective. A lot of these have been done by large-scale researchers. To be able to actually look at behavior assessment across these and be able to identify the right assessment tools for our field. And again, to really look at that risk adjustment is a venture that would require, multi-million dollar grants on our part. And so to be able to help provide these services through the type of work we do at BHCOE, and it makes me feel quite privileged to be a part of this next juncture, actually. So I think it's a great resource for that reason.
All of that is amazing. Looking forward to it all. And all right, so I'm going to be selfish here and end this with 2 questions for you, Ellie. Because in addition to just being a regular nerd, I am a word nerd. So I have 2 questions for you. One is BCO or BHCOE? Does it matter? Can we say both? What do you guys say internally to each other?
BHCOE is how I've heard it, how I got introduced to it. But we've heard it both ways. And I don't think we've ever taken offense to either.
And the second one is, you guys went with PAYOR, not PAYER. Is there a rule? I've been looking for the answer to this question.
Oh no, you asked the wrong person. I have no clue. I can tell you The question you pose is an excellent one for me because, when we think of providers, who's the provider? Who is the consumer? That changes with regards to stakeholders, right? So the consumer of our outcome work is actually the providers. So we have to think a lot and verbalize these things to each other all the time, because ultimately our consumers, the people we want to elevate the lives of, are the individuals impacted by, the behavioral symptoms of autism, and people who are living with and caretaking for them. But when we target and think about things we're developing to help, that may change as to who we're helping. And so needless to say, Shannon, we struggle with some of those and vocalize it to each other and go back and change things over and over again, because it matters.
Yeah, editorially, I can spend some time on some really ridiculous things. Okay. I want to say thank you to you, Ellie, and to you, Kristen, and always to you, Nissa, for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun, very informative. And for any of you who are looking for additional resources, everything that was name dropped today, we will put in the show notes and in the course resources, and try to make it as easy to find everything as we possibly can.
Thank you.
But thanks for joining us.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Behavioral View. To get your CEU, follow the link in the instructions below. You can then go to the attendance verification quiz, where you'll enter in the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate. If you've already done the work, you may as well get the credit.